We've been talking about a doctrine, right? The doctrine we're calling the dignity of the human person. The right teaching of any doctrine, as you know, is called orthodoxy. The wrong understanding of any doctrine is called heresy. Hilaire Belloc, in his classic The Great Heresies, reminds us that a heresy is usually not a denial of a doctrine, but an obsessive exaggeration of but one element of it. So, our orthodox expression, promotion, and defense of this Catholic doctrine of the dignity of the human person can become heretical if we wrong-headedly exaggerate only one of its carefully choreographed parts. The orthodox insistence upon the dignity of the human person, with the logical corollary that every person deserves dignity and respect, can become, as a matter of fact, heretical if it sinks into a narcissistic demand for whatever pleasure or right I feel I am entitled to at this moment. For the very same doctrine that gives rise to a grand tradition of respect for human rights also gives us the call to duty and responsibility. As Blessed Pope John Paul II often preached, genuine freedom is the ability to do what we ought, not the license to do whatever we want. And let me conclude with the story of a young man back in St. Louis, my hometown. I grew up with this fella. Let me call him Dan. He was a boyhood buddy. I lost track of Dan during college and seminary. I had heard that he had gone to Vietnam, that he had come back with a scrambled brain, that he was heavy into drugs, living on the street. I often thought of Dan and wondered whatever became of him. Well, a couple of weeks after my own ordination to the priesthood in 1976, guess who shows up at the rectory of my first parish? There was Dan, clean, well-dressed, smiling, with a very attractive young woman he introduced to me as his fiancée. And I invited him in, of course, and over a cup of coffee, Dan, on his own, brings up his grimy past. He says, Tim, you may have heard that I've been messed up big time. I was literally in the gutter. I was drinking, I was popping, I was smoking, I was injecting whatever I could. I had hit bottom. And late one night in a warehouse off Biddle Street, down on the Mississippi waterfront, another druggie and I had landed a stash of cheap heroin. And we were ready to give ourselves the injection when the other guy looks at me and he says, Dan, I dare you. You and I are both nothing but trash. We're both done with life. We probably don't have much of a tomorrow. What do you say we go out on a high? I dare you, Dan. I'll give you 10 seconds to come up with a decent reason to explain why we're even here. Or, I dare you, let's give each other a triple dose of this stuff and call it quits. Dan's telling me the story. He says, Tim, what was I to do? I knew I was at rock bottom. I knew I was in the gutter, but I wasn't willing to call it quits. And I had 10 seconds to give him and me a reason to keep going. And in my desperation about all that came into my blurry mind, get this, was the third question of the Baltimore Catechism that you and I learned in second grade at Holy Infant Grade School way back. And so I blurted it out. Why did God make you? God made me to know him, to love him, and to serve him in this life, and to be happy with him forever in the next. And he said the other guy had the needle suspended, ready to go, and he looked at me and he said, would you say that again? And Dan said, you bet I would. Why did God make me? God made me to know him, love him, and serve him in this life and to be happy with him in the next. And he said, my druggy friend thought a moment, and he finally answered, and he said, not bad. I'll take that answer. Let's just give ourselves a single dose, all right? And he says, we're both still here. Now that, my friends, is the doctrine of the dignity of the human person. It saved Dan's life. It saved the life of that young woman in Toronto. And when all is said and done, our creed is then nothing less than life-saving. Thank you very much for listening. Thanks. Thank you.